the going outside your habitat is more likely to kill you than any sort of emergency you might have inside. So you have to think of resiliency in a different way. Obviously, if you have one habitat only, like what Apollo did, they had the one capsule when they were on the surface, then really you have no options. But as soon as you have two, which is what happened at Apollo 13, right? One of them, they weren't on the surface, they were still in transit, but one of them got damaged, the other one became a lifeboat, and they could always escape to the other one and manage to get them all home alive.
Hello everyone, and welcome from The Outpost. Today marks the beginning of a special episode series introducing a new edition of the podcast. In this series, we'll explore fascinating scientific research relating to space, architecture, and science. Often, scientific publications are limited to a select audience in a cold conference room or confined to PDFs on internet browsers. I believe that the authors of scientific research deserve a more engaging platform to share their contributions with the world. Science is a collaborative process, and each research endeavor represents a crucial piece of a larger puzzle that we're all striving to solve. That's why Future Files aims to connect with authors who are eager to share their process and research in a fun and conversational setting. There's no better way to kick off the series than speaking with Georgi Petrov. I'm very excited about this episode. Georgie is a prominent space architect with over 20 years of experience in architecture, structural engineering, and designing for the outer world. In addition to being vice chair at the AIAA Space Architecture Technical Committee, he's an associate senior principal at Skidmore, Owings Merrill, an architectural firm that has established productive partnerships and collaborations with space agencies like ESA. Today, Georgie will be sharing insights on SOM's project, Decalogue for Space Architecture, 10 speculations on design for an interplanetary future. Through this project, Georgie and his team explored the question, how can we design the ideal conditions for human to thrive in outer space? Georgie, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be part of the first show, and I'm looking forward to the following shows to learn about all the great things our members are doing. So I've been involved in space architecture for 25-ish years or so, starting with my thesis, MArch thesis, a long time ago. But more recently, for the last 15 years, I've been working as a structural engineer and an architect at Skidmore, Owings Merrill, doing all sorts of projects all over the world. But also at SOM, I've been involved in the last 5 to 10 years involvement in space architecture as well. And I'd be happy to share one of our projects today. We have done several forays into space architecture, most notably a collaboration with the European Space Agency to give architecture to their idea of a moon village. But this is not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about another one of our projects.
So I'm very excited to talk to you about this project, which is called Decalogue for Space Architecture. And it's a very interesting word. It has roots in biblical terms for like 10 commandments, and I thought that was a very interesting way to kind of summarize very briefly the very important challenges and complex things that has to be thought of, at least, before we venture into doing architecture for space. And what I thought was interesting is that in this project, you didn't necessarily try to put any solutions, but rather thought-provoking, complex questions.
Perfect. That was exactly our goal with this project. This was a collaboration with the Triennale de Milano, and last year's version of it, I think the 23rd Triennale, was curated by Ersilia Vaudo, who's the head of diversity at the European Space Agency. She's an astrophysicist. and she was curating the exhibit. And so she kind of approached us with this idea. We kind of, over a year in preparing, thought of ways to participate in the Triennale exhibit. And we thought of maybe doing a project, but we didn't want to just do just another model or another thing here. We did this great thing and look at it. So working with her, coming up with ideas of how to participate, we came up with this idea to do the 10 things that a space architect needs to address in their projects. And we purposely wanted to keep it as a challenge. We didn't want, and she herself didn't want the exhibit to be very didactic, like this is what you have to do, and this is the solution. It was more about raising questions and provoking thought and ideas into the visitors. And so, the number 10 of them is a little bit random and a little bit cultural, like you pointed out. I don't want to call it the 10 commandments of space architecture, but definitely I think the illusion is there for that. So the number 10 is rather, I would say, random. But we did come up with 10 ideas, 10 challenges, 10 problems that need to be addressed by any space architect. And they kind of fall into two categories, roughly. 5 of them are about physical challenges and about the environment, and 5 of them are about psychological challenges and what it means to be a human in space. So,
I will insert the link in the description for the exhibit and a webpage that shows the installation. I thought that the videos and the clips that were done were absolutely amazing. And to get started on this, on talking about this, I extracted a quote from the articles, and it kind of sums up really nicely what space architecture is. And because you're a space architect, I'm going to start with this quote, and then you can tell me what other things that you can think of that relates to the space architecture before we delve into details. So the quote is, quote, "We must find the purest, most efficient expression of the enclosure that can be fabricated on Earth, survive the trip to the moon, and endure the vacuum of space." End quote. I thought that was a really good way to summarize basically what space architecture is. You have to go from Earth to outside of Earth and endure the complexity in between. Is that fair?
That is the very good summary of the technological challenge of space architecture. Because of the harshest environments, it really forces you to focus on what's important and the only thing that is really necessary, the minimal thing that's necessary. When we do architecture on Earth, the surface of our planet is so pleasant and forgiving that a lot of things could be done not in the most efficient way, and it's still okay. But you don't have that luxury when the environment is so challenging and unforgiving. So I think that quote sums up the technical challenge as well. But as I said, that's half of the Decalogue. The other half is about the psychological and the human challenge, which is a little bit different also. And again, something that needs to be very focused, and you got to really think of what's the essential bits when you're thinking about space architecture as compared to normal terrestrial architecture.
Yeah, I agree, because I feel like the exactly what you said, the other part is kind of more for the engineers maybe to figure out, but the human experience, which is the second part of the Decalogue, it feels like more of the architectural aspect of it. So we can start with that then. So the first one in the human experience part was the confinement. How do you relieve your people from the feelings of isolation while being in a very small space, while also allowing for privacy?
Yeah, so that was this was trying to capture the challenge of the need for a variety of experiences in a tiny space. And so there was several kind of thoughts that we're trying to combine into this one. One is about that on a daily basis, we encounter spaces where you could be alone. We encounter spaces where you could be together with one or two people in a small group. And then we have spaces where your whole community could gather, like a public square or a concert arena and things like that. So those are kind of like the three levels of privacy that you need to try to recreate in the minimal confined space as much as possible. So even a small habitat would need a place for everybody to be able to shut themselves and be alone sometimes, but then you also need spaces where everybody in your group can gather together at once. The other aspect we tried to capture on this one is about, and it's this idea is alluded to in several of our points, but the idea of needing visual variety. And one important thing is to be able to look outside as well. So to the importance of windows, which is kind of well documented in a lot of text about space architecture. And that one kind of merges both the technical and the psychological, because putting a window in a pressure vessel is very hard engineering-wise, but also very important human-wise. So that's kind of like the ideas that we're trying to incorporate into that one.
That's interesting because it reminds me of having like the architecture as a discipline. I feel like if you're doing real proper architecture, is like kind of always walking on a thin line between two different things. You want a really beautiful structure, but you also want it to stand up. You really want very functional spaces, but also artistic. So I think that's where a lot of this, I think if we want to articulate what the space architecture is, that's exactly it, probably because of the extreme environment. So do you think that, like, with the visual variations that we were talking about, do you think VR and AR would play with that? Or do you think that we still need a window regardless?
Oh, that's a very good question that I think has been kind of mulled around for a while about the benefits of VR. It partially raises the question, if you could recreate it with VR, then why leave the Earth? That's what the first thing I think about is that. And then maybe it's a generational thing, but I still prefer to actually see it with my own eyes rather than seeing it digitally. AR, though, I think has a much more useful place where you could collaborate with the robots and collaborate with the environment and get information and things like that, augmented reality. But the whole idea of you going to the moon and just looking at it on a screen seems weird and unnatural. If you're going to invest this effort to get humans there physically, then I would prefer to be able to see it with my own eyes.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know with the newer generation if this is going to be a problem. It feels like their entire life might be simulated, so maybe it's not going to be a big deal. But
yeah, I don't want to be, show my age and say, "Oh, these young people these days." But I do appreciate that maybe it might not be such a thing to overcome mentally. But even technology can fail, right? And sometimes we have plenty of connectivity issues here on Earth. Being able to rely just on the passive view outside is probably not a bad thing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's fascinating is that it feels like in any space architectural project, we would need to be designing for a specific type of resilient humans. I wonder how much because if anyone is going to space, they really have to be vetted for mental, emotional stability as much as possible. Do you think that with time, architecture can incorporate things for people who are not astronauts and who might not have this emotional stability. Because if you think about it, like if someone decides that I'm going to leave Earth now and go on the first mission to Mars, would it be someone who's very risk cautious, or it would be someone who I'm going to do it whatever it takes, and then I'm just going to do it right now?
I think the first of anything would always be still done by very prepared people, and that's really where the realm of government agencies and international collaborations. But after the first step has been done many times, then we get to a point where everything has been worked out, or a lot of things have been worked out, and normal humans can start doing it. And I think we're there already with low Earth orbit. We're definitely there. In the last 5 years, we've had people with very minimal training go up in orbit. So if you're talking about low Earth orbit, 50 years ago, that was the first people, and everybody was super trained. But really, in the last 5 years, we've definitely seen people that they call themselves astronauts because technically they've been to space, but they have not had years of training to go to space. So if you're talking about low Earth orbit or even suborbital flights, we're definitely there now. People that are unvetted have gone and stayed for. The last Axiom mission did have one really trained astronaut, but they were there for a week. So we're there, but we're looking to go to the moon in the next 2 to 10-ish years, and I think going to the moon would still be very trained people. Maybe if we follow the progression with a low Earth orbit, maybe it'd be another 20 or 30 years before there's enough infrastructure and enough experience of going to the moon that we could think of sending not so trained people there. So how does that affect architecture? Is that I think you have to, if you're on the early bits where you're still very confined and you have one capsule and things like that, and everything is super tiny and super Spartan, then it's probably going to require a lot of training and a lot of vetting. But by the time you have more infrastructure and more spaces and more people, then the normal progression is to have unvetted people going there too. So
this is a good point to bring me to another aspect of the angles that you took for the complexity, which is the symbiosis, which is the space habitat is it would have to be an ecosystem. I feel so much better with the plants that I have in my house, even though they don't speak to me, but it's one of those things that maybe this could be solving some of the isolation. So can you tell us more about the symbiosis aspect of it?
Well, that one's one that I'm very excited about, and it's one that actually I started in. It was a big part of my MArch thesis 20 years ago, and the idea that a lot of our science fiction, if you look at our films and books, but mostly films, it's always humans and their machines going over to take over the universe and explore. In Star Wars and Star Trek, there's no plants whatsoever. And I started thinking about it a long time ago that's not really how it's going to happen. We're going to have to bring plants for long term, for food, but definitely for making a better environment and psychologically. And so I had this whole series of ideas of how you could incorporate plants in all sorts of different parts of a space habitat. Obviously you're going to have some greenhouses where you're growing food, especially if you're thinking about long term and trying to close the loop as much as possible. But also, emotionally, where in each crew quarters, each crew member could have the opportunity to grow something of their liking, something from their home environment or from their home culture. I've always wanted to grow plants myself too, whatever I've lived, even in my college days. So that is a big part was at the time missing. I mean, I can't say I'm the first person to think of that, but now I see a lot more space architecture incorporating plants in the last 10 years or so, which just makes me very happy. And then I also thought of symbolism of plants. I thought it'd be kind of cool to, if you're starting a long-term settlement, that maybe you plant a tree and it grows and it's like the first tree. And just like on the International Space Station where the new people arrive, they always take a picture at the same place with the new crew members. That I was thinking that it'd be a nice piece of beautiful ceremony and symbolism where each new person arriving at the settlement could have their picture taken with the first tree, things like that. So, on the Decalogue, we didn't go into that much detail, but we did try to capture this idea that you really need to account for plants. Animals would be great too, but animals are a lot harder. Especially vertebrates and stuff like that. I think it'd be pretty easy to do fish and things like that, which are fun to have around and good for protein, not very terribly engaging socially. Another one that is also a challenge that I don't think has been solved is that a lot of plants need pollinators, and so how do you solve for pollinators without having insects flying all over the habitat is a challenge that I don't think has been solved yet. But anyway, those are details. The big picture that we wanted to say is that if you're a space architect, you should definitely start thinking and incorporating how are plants going to live along with the humans in your habitat.
About the animals and it's hard. I would still like to have jellyfish. I think the jellyfish would be a very great addition for color and variations.
I hadn't heard of that one. That's a good one. Yes, definitely. In the hydroponics.
And the hydroponics, yeah. So the other one, which is the resilience and designing a habitat that would withstand an emergency. Every time I tell someone I do space architecture, the easiest way I could describe it to them is like, how you are on Earth, and if there's an emergency, you open the door and leave. Well, I design for situations where you cannot just open the door and leave. So please tell us some more about that, because if we are concerned about, for example, payloads and how much we can take with us, then how big can this habitat be before where would we go if we need multiple points where there's not one single point of failure?
I mean, I think you summarized it very well. The going outside your habitat is more likely to kill you than any sort of emergency you might have inside. So you have to think of resiliency in a different way. Obviously, if you have one habitat only, like what Apollo did, they had the one capsule when they were on the surface, then really you have no options. But as soon as you have two, which is what happened at Apollo 13, right? One of them, they weren't on the surface, they were still in transit, but one of them got damaged, the other one became a lifeboat, and it could always escape to the other one and manage to get them all home alive. So the part of the idea is that, if you have more than one element, you have to make sure that you can always get to all your parts, and if there's a issue in one part, it shouldn't cut off the rest of your habitat into inaccessible portions. One bit is when you have very few in the very beginning, you're probably going to have a rover, so something like that could act like a lifeboat and things like that. But that one is a lot more if you already have more than one element and a few of them, you should always try to arrange them in such a way is that they have multiple exits out of each one, and all of them are interconnected. So whenever I go to visit student projects or look at papers of other space architecture things, I'm always kind of looking for that. Is there is there one bit that somebody drew that if there's something goes wrong there, that all the other parts are disconnected and inaccessible from each other? So that's kind of like the types of things we're trying to capture in that one.
Do you, to follow up on this one, do you usually find these solutions by students? Do you think, how often do you encounter someone who thought about this?
Pretty. I think a lot of people get it, and it's pretty good. But very often there's somebody that that draws one thing with a bunch of things coming out of it, and then no way to get from any of these other bits around. So it's an important bit, but I think a lot of people get it. It's pretty easy to get once you think about it as a requirement. So.
So the next one is the light, and I think it has something to do with the one after, which is the color. And we kind of brushed on it, a little bit. So tell us more about this. And if there's if we're traveling in space, there's limited color variations and limited. How can we integrate the circadian rhythm with the light? To simulate like just the day and night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Those two are kind of pretty interrelated. I think that's where actually the augmented reality bit can come in, where you can play with the wall surfaces if you have any blank wall surfaces on your spacecraft, which is I've seen some of these. Proposals of these very interactive walls, but in reality you have so much equipment and things that there's usually not much actual wall space left over. In fact, in the ISS you have kind of close to zero space where we could do something like this, and you could actually probably most easily do it with light. In fact, for one of our Moon Village related projects, we kind of developed a pretty detailed solution or proposal for it, where with a couple of different LED strips, by mixing them in different ways, you could recreate a lot of different color light. And a lot of people have thought about that on a typical day on the planet Earth, you do have a very different color. In the morning, at noon, in the evening, you have storms come through. Provides a lot of variety. On the ISS, you turn on the lights and they're the same color lights, and then you turn them off. So it's this very abrupt on-off type of a situation, which is very different than what we experience on a typical day here on Earth. So you can play a lot with the lights. All of our destinations that we can imagine going to are in our lifetime. The moon, hopefully Mars, the asteroids, they're all very monotone, right? Even Mars, which is not gray or black, but it's still the same-ish type of color, the rusty brown everywhere with no variation. So the only variation that you could get is in your habitat and how you make it. And so it's both adding color, but also adding color that changes. And I think the easiest way to do it is with light. And if you have some surfaces where you could turn them into a monitor or some kind of a digital display, then you could really be creative and come up with different ways to play different colors depending on the different crew members and time of day and things like that. So
that's true, because even I'm in Toronto, and even in winter when it becomes gray and there's no color, it really puts people down a little bit. And then the sun comes on shining, and then everybody's like wearing color and everybody's happy. Even everybody looks more beautiful in the summer than in the winter. So do you think something like this, two questions actually. One, do you think that seasons and simulating seasons would be important? And also, because when people leave Earth, do you think that they should continue on the day and night cycle, or they have to make their own time to adapt?
Oof, I think the day and night cycle is something we've evolved with, so it'd be hard to adapt that. So even no matter where we go, I think for the foreseeable future, we'd have to stay on a 24-hour-ish sort of time scale. I mean, on Mars is 24 and a half, right? So that's, I think it's pretty easily achievable, half an hour. But I don't think something that's much more deviating from that is done. I mean, our brain needs sleep, definitely on a pretty regular cycle for just staying alive even. Yeah, I don't think would be changing the day to night. I think there's a lot of experience with that from Antarctica, from the ISS, staying on a 24-hour cycle at a chosen time zone and duration. I don't think we'd be deviating from that very much. But the seasons is an important one that I agree with. I live in New York City, where we have 4 seasons, and I lived in other places where they only have 2, and that might be a cultural preference. For me, seasons are very important, but there is parts on Earth where they don't have seasons, and people are happy and content living there. So that might be a crew preference rather than a universal human must, I would say. For me personally, I definitely would want to recreate some aspect of the seasons if I move to the moon. But I don't think that'd be true for every human.
Yeah, I would rather be sunny all year long.
Constant summer.
No seasons for me. It's okay. I'm good.
My favorite season is fall, so I would have a nice fall. In fact, I joke with my friends that my favorite time of the year is at 4 p.m. On an October afternoon. So if I
That's
can,
very specific.
yeah, it's like there's that bit in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where they design planets to suit super rich aliens. So yeah, maybe if it was up to me and I was the dictator, I would make it October afternoon
4 p.m. all the time.
No, but I'm kidding. Yeah, I think that season is more of a cultural thing, maybe. But anyway.
No, it's one of those things where all of these discussions are necessary, because yes, they might be details, but on a bigger scale, they are important because of how people prefer different things, how different people perceive different things. So it's important. And which brings me to the question for you as a space architect. In architecture on Earth, we're able to have this variation in the materials and textures and to have different I don't know how to say that, but to have different layers for specific design. How do you see that achieved with space architecture? Especially with having all the materials needing to be fireproof and
yeah, exactly. That's what was my first point was going to be that you have a lot more stringent testing that you need to do for any material. Fire, also off-gassing. There's I think with the emphasis on sustainability on terrestrial architecture, a lot of the issues with VOCs and things like that are getting addressed here, even on Earth. But definitely it's a lot more stringent when you're taking things up in an enclosed atmosphere, that you can't have any off-gassing of any type. So you're limited in materials, but I don't see why, natural woods, for example, if treated properly, cannot be incorporated into the finishes. You can do wood veneers pretty thin, pretty light, with backing of other materials. So it could be very light, but still you get the texture and the feel and warmth. I don't think any wood has flown in space, but definitely, I mean, it's flammable, but if it's really small and if it's, treated, maybe it's doable. That brings us a little bit back to the color issue too. That is one thing when I see a lot of space architecture projects, color is kind of like an afterthought, or a lot of times people render it in Rhino with just grays and don't really think about it. So this is where we as architects can really influence design for habitats in outer space, is to bring materiality and our knowledge of materials and products. So it's a very great place for space architecture to contribute to the mission of sending humans to space. Is material selection for color, for texture, for feel. There's a lot of opportunity to develop new products too. We at SOM are involved in a lot of research with universities and other things, other places to not only do architecture, but to develop new products that we could use in our buildings. And so space architects can definitely be part of this type of an endeavor, developing new materials to use on the interiors.
Okay, so I do have something. I would really feel bad if I didn't bring this one item from the Decalogue, which I thought that I've always been fascinated by the concept of the gravity and how to simulate the gravity. Can you please tell us a bit about this, and also how much do you see, because of all of the things that we can deal with, seems like the gravity is to me is the complicated one, because then you have to either do an artificial gravity, which I don't know if it's done, or acceleration. Like, tell us more.
A very, very good one. So we have tons of data of how the human body behaves in 1G, right? that's where we all experience, and we have quite a lot of data at microgravity, 0G, and we know that at 0G, bad stuff starts happening to the human body over long periods of time, and astronauts have to spend a lot of time trying to prevent bad stuff from happening to their bodies, exercise and things like that. We have almost no data what happens in between 1G and 0G. So is there some minimum gravity where none of the effects are present? Is that minimum the 1/3 G on Mars? Is 1/6 G on the Moon? Is it a linear interpolation between 0 and 1, or what? So actually, 20 years ago, I was kind of helping a little bit on a student experiment that was trying to answer that ended up not flying in space. We were going to fly some mice and spin them in different gravities and bring them back down. It ended up not happening.
Oh, the poor mice.
Yeah.
What's the first one?
It was called Mars Gravity Student Satellite, but it ended up not happening. But we need some more data like this to know of what happens. Is if we go to the moon for years to live, is the 1/6 G enough to counteract the adverse effects of 0G? We don't know the answer to that. The other interesting bit about gravity is that we move differently in microgravity than in 1G. Famously, the Apollo astronauts came up with this hop that was kind of the most energy efficient way to move around the surface. That was different than walking and different than running. And one thing I'm wondering is, all of us space architects are drawing things for the moon, for example. But I don't know what the right answer is for the correct ceiling height. If you're walking around your habitat on the moon, do we need to have higher ceilings? Because you're in your normal walking around, your room, are you going to be jumping up more and things like that? There's been some attempts to recreate lunar gravity for locomotion studies, right? Where you strap people to different contraptions to lower their experience of gravity, but I don't think we have an answer for that. I know I've drawn moon habitats with 2.1, 2.3 meter floor to ceiling height, but I don't know if that's the right answer. So that is an interesting challenge. As far as the artificial gravity, there's quite a lot of research. Ted Hall has written extensively about it, with about the various things you have to consider, and speeds and sizes and things like that. So I think on the way to Mars, I would think that spinning the spacecraft against a counterweight to reproduce Martian gravity would be key, so that when the astronauts arrive, they're already used to the Martian gravity and have been living on it on the whole trip. If you're on the surface of the moon, there's nothing you can do. You're at 1/6 G, and you just have to learn to adapt to it, and figure out what the correct ceiling is, and what the best way to move around your habitat is. So it's interesting challenges.
I would like to talk about the installation itself and how you came up with the ideas. How did you translate the text into the visuals, and how the process works? So walk us through it.
So as I said, we had several ideas of how to participate, and when Ersilia challenged us to come up with the Decalogue, the 10 big ideas that are important to space architects. We came up with the ideas and the text, and we wrote a bunch of text, and then the question became, how do we present this in an engaging way at the exhibit? Nobody wants to go to a museum and just sit and read a bunch of text on the wall. And so we partnered with a great company called ... out of Milano that worked with us collaboratively back and forth to come up with these 10 videos. One short 30-second video for each of the ideas. And we were very keen that this video should be abstract. It should convey the challenge, but not really suggest any solutions, not point to solutions. So that was a kind of another topic that we wanted to be sure that we're not suggesting solutions, just sparking interest. So we have these 10 videos, each presenting an idea, and they're kind of split into two. One is alluding to what happens on Earth, and one is alluding to what would happen out in outer space. And so it was kind of pretty successful. We actually wanted them to be in a circle in the space in Milano, with the emphasis that they're all co-equal, right? Like Knights of the Round Table. There's not one that's more important than the other. In the end, they were kind of in a row that you had to walk past them in a line. But now that the exhibit is over and they live in the virtual world online, you can see them in any order. There isn't any specific order. So that's kind of how we ended up setting it up. It was pretty successful. When I went to visit it, it was one of the bits of the exhibit that was very popular. People were stopping by to see it.
They are great. Like the fact that you're showing the Earth and the terrestrial environment and the outer space environment side to side and side by side, and then seeing the process, how it's different in both. I think it's fascinating, and the graphics as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the graphics were all ... They were excellent. They came up with the aesthetic and the visual representation. Obviously, we gave them feedback to make sure that they're technically right and things like that. But they were awesome. It was really good working with them.
I want to be mindful of your time, so I have one space architecture question for you. So you have a lot of experience. 20 years is a really extensive time to work on space architecture or architecture in general, complexities, multidisciplinary approach. You think about the structure, and you think about the materials, and you think about all the psychological impacts. Have you seen or designed your perfect habitat that would kind of conclude all of those years of experience, or you haven't done that yet?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've been thinking about space architecture, but obviously, I haven't built anything that has gone anywhere. So until I believe that until you build and test something, you really don't know, and we have quite a growing and diverse field of people, the architects thinking about space and designing bits, and we have a very healthy community with a lot of papers and a lot of designs and a lot of conferences and a lot of cool ideas. But really, until we build and fly something, we won't know this answer of what's the right thing. I'm definitely a believer in testing, and any time that I've been involved in not just space architecture but other things where we've tried to do something new, until you build a mock-up, until you build it in the real environment, there's always new things coming around. So there might be the perfect design out there, but until we actually try it out, we won't know. So I can't say there's one that's built.
No, you're right. Well, then probably we can say the things that will probably not work. Like, I've seen designs for space architectural habitats that are made of ice on Mars. I mean, it's an interesting concept, but is it doable? It's like these questions of probably we won't know what works, but maybe we know more of what wouldn't necessarily be feasible. Let's say not work, because let's say never, but
yeah, that's true. And I mean, the ones that I've seen with the ice, they're ice in combination with other things. It's not like the ice is holding the pressure and things like that. So trying to incorporate the local materials as an idea is pretty cool. But again, unless we try it out, we won't know if it's true. So that's a little bit the frustrating bit about being a space architect for a long time, is that we are pretty good at developing ideas and coming up with the constraints and things like that. But it's frustrating not to be able to have physical stuff that you can actually try out for real.
So you've been doing this for a really long time. Are you excited about the recent pickup in acceleration and the innovation of it?
Oh yes, very much so. It's it really has been exponentially growing compared to the first 15 years of when I was thinking about it. And it's very exciting, all the different opportunities, and both the government agencies and private players coming in and picking up again from the not the leading edge, but the stuff that's already been done, doing it better and doing it cheaper, and a lot of new creativity is coming on. And I see it in the growing interest in our, the Space Architecture Technical Committee, and a lot of new universities and new students are coming in eager to participate. So it's great.
Yeah, it is great. It is a very exciting time to do it. Are you able to tell us what you're working on right now, or can you talk about?
The Decalogue for Space Architecture, the Triennale that closed in December, but the IAC is coming to Milano not this year, next year, and we're looking to have a big space architecture event there, and hopefully we will be able to recreate the Decalogue there as well as part of an exhibit. So we'll have a space architecture symposium right after the IAC in the October of 2024. So as part of the SATC, that's our sort of next really big event, and hopefully we'll gather a lot of space architects for a full day of activities. We're trying to have an exhibit associated with it, so it's a little bit bigger than usual. So that should be pretty exciting. That's something that's coming up.
I was seeing lately there has been talks and concepts proposed for future homes made of fungus, and the case for them. Did you hear about them? What do you think about that?
No, that's actually a really good example of this idea that we just talked about architects being involved in developing new materials and new products. And I know there's several of our members that are quite keen on it, and I've seen papers that are at conferences. And actually, here in New York City at PS1, they have an exhibit of a structure made out of bricks out of the fungus. So I think it's a pretty good idea. We at SOM also have a project for something we call a biobrick. It's a collaboration with a university to come up with a material that actually absorbs carbon from the atmosphere and things like that, which is what the idea of the fungus is. Ours is slightly different idea, but this excitement about producing new materials that are relevant for the new challenges is great, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it. I'm personally not involved in it, but I'm following it, and it's pretty exciting, and it's very encouraging to see us developing new products and new tools you have to test it a lot before you're taking it on your spacecraft, but it has a lot of potential.
Do you have anything for us before we say our...
Another one that I saw recently in our news is there's been a few new developments in space solar power, which is a pretty cool topic. I think a group in Caltech recently demonstrated beaming from a small CubeSat down to Earth, and they measured actual measurable energy. It's something that Brent Sherwood has been talking about for a few years about his big picture idea of the four space futures of humanity. The 4 big ideas of what we could do in the future in space, and one of them is developing space solar power. So things are moving in that direction as well. It's pretty good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.